Hello, everyone. Please welcome to the webinar hosted by the Arab Organization for Human Rights in the UK. We're going to be hearing from doctors reporting back regarding the targeting of Kamal Adwan Hospital, a systematic campaign to dismantle Gaza's healthcare sector. The Arab Organization for Human Rights in the UK invites you to this critical webinar addressing the systematic targeting of healthcare in Gaza during the recent conflict. The key topics will be a deliberate targeting of medical facilities, including the attack on the Kamal Adwan Hospital and its devastating impact on Gaza's healthcare system. Violations against medical personnel, such as the detention of healthcare workers, including Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya. The broader implications of these actions for international humanitarian law and global public health. Thank you to our distinguished speakers, including who have witnessed these atrocities firsthand. First, we're going to hear from Dr. Mohamed Abu Mughaiseb from Doctors Without Borders. Please, everyone, you have about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we will be back to have a final message from each of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for inviting me to this webinar. So, MSF, we are here, since 20 years in Gaza, and you know that even before 7th of October, the health sector section were really suffering from due to the closure and siege. There was always 50% of medical items which are zero stock. There was difficulties in referring patients to abroad for specialized treatment. So actually the health system was really fragile even before 7th of October. And what we witnessed during the last decades with the ongoing waves of violence that occurred at that time, always the health section was, or the hospitals or private care were most of the time targeted. So, but this time, it was very difficult after the 7th of October and the retaliation of the Israeli army. There was clear targeting of the main hospitals in Gaza. It was not Kamal Adwan. Kamal Adwan was one of the last hospitals that has been targeted, but actually all the hospitals in Gaza were targeted. Mainly Shifa, which is the biggest hospital in Palestine, not in Gaza as well, was targeted under evacuation, port evacuation. Same for Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, same for the Rafah hospitals. So what's happening in the Kamal Adwan was continuous of what was really since the beginning of this war. MSF was calling, Doctors Without Borders were calling to avoid targeting health structures, hospitals, clinics, health staff. But unfortunately, this didn't actually had a kind of ear to listen on this, and we were addressing it to the Israeli side all time that we had faced this kind of targeting of health facilities. We were forced several times as well to evacuate. Our teams were forced to evacuate. Some of them were been arrested. And we as well addressed this to the Israeli side, but as well there was no information and there is no answer. What's going in now in the north, and Kamal Adwan, as you know, is the main hospital in the north area, the north of Gaza area, Jabalia, Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun. And it's the only hospital which provides medical care to the population who were remaining there. What happened recently, in the last 2 months, targeting the hospital directly, not, even around it, but directly to the hospital, arresting at the end Dr. Hussam and the team there. This is really something that we can call, it's part of the really ethnic cleansing. It's really the forced displacement of the population of the north, putting siege on them, blockade on them. The basic needs of life are not present in whole Gaza, and mainly in the north of Gaza, Jabalia, Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun. We have teams who were working in the north at the beginning, but then they were they were obliged to leave as well because they are Palestinian team. I mean, they are from Palestine, so they have families and they were obliged as well to leave the north area. Now they are in Gaza City. The situation I cannot describe, but what they really saw, it's horrible. I mean, people are suffering from lack of basic needs. The water, the food is not entering to the north of Gaza. The health section now, there is no hospitals there at all. I mean, what is remaining is Indonesian hospital, which is partially, let's say, partially functioning, and there is no accessibility to it, to the hospital. Same as Al Auda Hospital, so you don't access it. It's just a structure there with a remaining team and patients inside, but no one can reach. So apparently there is no health provider now, no health structure, no hospitals, no clinics, no medical care in the north area of Gaza.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mughaiseb. Next, we will have Dr. Junaid Sultan speak. Dr. Sultan, you have between 5 and 7 minutes. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you so much for having me on board today. What I would really like to highlight, what my colleagues have already mentioned, are some fundamental and important aspects here, which are particularly in relation to the international humanitarian laws and their application here. The situation here is that North is still not completely vacant. There are civilians there, and they are being constantly attacked. And it's very important, it is their basic fundamental right as per international humanitarian laws that they should have access to the basic healthcare. And right now the situation is that they have no access to any healthcare at all. And the nearest hospital which they have to go, it will be the Al Ahli and Al Wafa, which are in the Gaza city. And both of these hospitals have been attacked as well, and which we have seen in the last week. And even 7 healthcare workers have been killed at Al Wafa. So this is a complete and total violation of the international humanitarian laws. And where my MSF colleague was mentioning, kind of, it's very important to link these things together, because if you will completely stop the healthcare services in an area and the civilian population have no access to it, that means it is a complete loss of hope. It means that they will not have anywhere to go and get any sort of access and treat and have any sort of a care provided to them. That means a complete annihilation of that population. That means that population will be at complete risk of dying, because it's not only the death from the bombs and bullets and all the warfare, but the lack of healthcare facilities itself is the biggest killer. And I must put it in the simple words that you can consider it equivalent to the nuclear warfare, actually. Because, like, what's the biggest weapon you can use in the warfare? You can go and just bomb them and put an atom bomb on somebody and kill them all. And it's the silent equivalent way that you actually completely destroy the healthcare infrastructure of that population. What will happen is that the direct and indirect impact of killing so many people as a result of the healthcare is so significant, because that will kill so many people more than what any other kind of warfare can kill. And that's what being actually executed here. And this is very important to understand and try to understand the implication of it in relation to the international humanitarian laws. So we have to really stand and support for this, that this is the fundamental right of any human being on any part of the earth, that they should have access to the healthcare, and they should provide it immediate life, limb saving, and any other access to the healthcare, and why they've been denied of that. The second impact is that in the last 80 days, we have seen how the Kamal Adwan hospital was completely besieged, and Abu Safiya, how he was basically linking and asking the international community and raising this voice, and he was showing video evidence every day inside, that how the children were being targeted, how the hospital staff was being targeted, how the essential important fundamental facilities like the intensive care, the oxygen tank, and how the hospital generators were destroyed day after day. And he was giving the evidence of all of that, and nobody could do anything. And this is completely unfair, that how the oppressor could be the judge, lawyer, witness, and executioner and can do everything. And this is very important, that we need to send the international media on kind of the ground, and they need to show all this. And we need to actually ask UN to provide the special commissions, and we need to set up a commission and report on that, and we need to highlight and bring this all out. And we should support Dr. Safiya at this point, and we need to stand for him and raise the voice in his support right now. And it is very, very fundamentally important at this point. I don't know how many people are aware of it, but in the last 24 hours before, the hospital was targeted in that way, and he was basically captured from there. And he also even offered the forces that they can come and they can set up a camp and they can stay in the hospital. And even what else and more can be offered other than that? The hospital can be even kind of covered by the forces and they can stay there. But even that kind of request was not being kind of listened, and that was denied. And the hospital was completely destroyed, and how the hospital staff was being attacked, and how he was tortured on kind of at the time of the when he was captured. So these are all the violations of the not only international humanitarian laws, but further amendments in the form of Geneva Convention and Roman Statute. And these are the things which we have to continuously highlight and raise the voice. Because if we will not stand for these things now, that means the future of the whole world is very bleak. That means that anybody can stand up tomorrow and can go and do anything anywhere. And they will have nobody to stop, and they will have basically no control on anything. So my kind of request here to the whole global community, and in particular to the health governing bodies, including the medical association, is to this is the time that we need to stand up and we need to raise the voice for the international humanitarian laws and do whatever we can to support here, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sultan. We were supposed to be joined by Dr. Mohamed Tahir. He's an international surgeon on a humanitarian mission in Gaza. But unfortunately, he has lost his internet connection due to circumstances in Gaza right now. And we're not sure if he'll be able to make it or not. So hopefully he will. And in the meantime, we would like to go and hear from Dr. Yasser Khan. Dr. Khan, you have between 5 and 7 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. So my name is Yasser Khan. I'm an eye surgeon and eye plastic surgeon, and I was in Gaza, to be honest, exactly a year ago. Right now, I was in Gaza in December and January of 2023, 2024, only 3 months after this war and genocide. And I went again in March, 2 months later. And even in the 3 months when I first went to Gaza a year ago, and then 5 months after, the conditions were horrible. And the things that I've seen that I think many of us have seen were horrific. Nasser Hospital in March was already destroyed, evacuated, closed down, patients left behind, dead bodies deteriorating in the hospital. That was already there when I went. I work at the European Gaza Hospital, which was the only hospital that was really open, that was full service at the time, with with all the services and surgical ORs going on where I did my surgeries, but the indiscriminate attacks were still occurring. And so I, as an eyewitness to this genocide, I come to this from moral, ethical, and philosophical angle. In addition to what my wonderful colleagues have said, I mean, the systematic targeting of the healthcare workers in Gaza by the Israeli government is a violation of humanitarian principles, international law, and just basic human decency. I mean, the attack on Kamal Adwan Hospital and all hospitals, virtually all hospitals, and the kidnapping of healthcare workers, abduction, killing, including Dr. Hussam, are glaring examples of the atrocities that have been committed against a system meant to save lives and not take them. I mean, healthcare workers in general, I mean, we have to emphasize to everybody around the world, are not combatants. We're protectors of life, right? I mean, we treat the injured, we care for the most vulnerable, we uphold principles of neutrality in medicine. We save lives regardless of political or military affiliations. I mean, that's what we do. And detaining us or the healthcare workers specifically in Palestine is a direct attack on humanity, on the very essence of humanity. Now, this is not just a moral failure, but a violation of international law. As you know, Article 18 of the Fourth Geneva Convention explicitly mandates the protection of medical personnel. Their detention is a war crime, and these actions erode our global commitments to the sanctity of humanitarian work. As a lifetime humanitarian, this concerns me because it affects everything going forward, every humanitarian effort going forward. The consequences are catastrophic. By disrupting medical care, these acts already push an already destroyed healthcare system beyond collapse, and you'll get thousands of more deaths and widespread suffering, as is going on in northern Gaza and everywhere else. And the Lancet estimated almost 200,000 dead 3 or 4 months ago. Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya recently said that there's at least 300,000 people that have died already. And this does not include the wounded, which is a death sentence. So the numbers are huge, right? And I think those of us that have been on the ground know that 300,000 people dead is not an unreasonable number or estimate. At the core of these actions lies a profound ethical failure. Detaining those of us, the healthcare workers who risk their life to save others, really betrays the principles of humanity and compassion. They have dedicated their lives to preserving life no matter what. And those of us who've seen the Palestinian healthcare workers, they're all heroes. They work tirelessly 24 hours a day. So, failing to protect medical professionals, I think, sets a very dangerous precedent internationally. Undermining global norms, inviting further violations of humanitarian principles, all is just a very, very dangerous precedent to set. And I think the international community cannot remain silent, and we must act decisively. Finally, I'll end off with this. The suffering caused by these actions is not confined to the present, right? We all know that the long-term psychological trauma that has been inflicted on Palestinians, women, children, men in Gaza will ripple through generations. Denying access to healthcare in times of conflict, and especially here, deepens these wounds. And we'll be dealing with a nation with a people that are scarred and will be dependent on international aid for a lifetime. So I basically I ask for I think our ask is really 3 points, right? And when it comes to healthcare, I'm going to simplify and end with this. Is really 3 points. One is, of course, to stop this war and genocide and ceasefire immediately, but also releasing all the detained healthcare professionals, which number in the thousands, including Dr. Hussam, and ending attacks on the healthcare infrastructure, which includes clinics and hospitals. This is not just a legal obligation, it's a moral duty. It will be a step towards alleviating suffering and restoring dignity to the people in Gaza. And I think as a world, as humanity, we can't look away from this. And I think many of us are eyewitnesses here, and I think we all have to keep this going, keep these efforts, keep these webinars, these press conferences, this advocacy going until this is over and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you also, I just want to mention really quick, thank you also for mentioning Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya and the detained healthcare workers. I would like to continue. We have next we have Dr. Mark Perlmutter with us. Dr. Perlmutter, would you kindly unmute yourself? And you have about 5 to 7 minutes. Thank you. Dr. Perlmutter, are you there? Okay, we will go ahead and open up and hear from Dr. James Smith.
I'm back now. I'm so
Dr.
sorry.
Smith. Oh, okay. That's all right. Thank
My
you so much.
apologies. I could not get my into an area where I had reception.
That is always an issue.
I literally just finished in the operating room, so I'm so sorry.
Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. I presume you want to hear my experience in taking care of injured healthcare workers during my time in Gaza.
Yes, we would. And we would also like to hear a special message also about the healthcare workers that have been detained from Kamal Adwan Hospital. In particular, Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya, who is still being detained.
Right. My personal experience is at the European Gaza Hospital, where I took care of multiple injured workers that were specifically targeted. They were targeted by sniper rifles, and they were targeted by what will probably be proven to be an illegal weapon that Israel had used in the past, these tungsten fledgets. They weren't dart-shaped devices that the UN had declared illegal historically that Israel had used. These are small little tungsten cylinders, very much like a pencil eraser in shape, but a third of the size, that traveled at extremely high speeds with almost no visible entry wound, almost no visible exit wound, but homogenized tissues between the two wounds. These they were delivered in cluster bombs. It's an illegal weapon to deliver it that way. They were seen all through Gaza, not just by my team. It's not the size of the wound that matters, it's the soft tissue damage from the cavitation on the inside. So the higher the velocity, the worse the wound. And even if it hits an extremity, the amount of soft tissue damage was pervasive. And we took care of nurses with brachial plexus injuries that have almost no entrance or exit wounds, but the entire brachial plexus was destroyed, vascular injuries, multiple nerve injuries. So when it didn't kill the healthcare worker, it maimed them for life. And often more than one extremity was damaged with no visible external wounds. And so those were horrific. Regular standard high velocity gunshot wounds are visibly devastating, requiring amputations almost always for those who live through it. One story comes to mind more than any other in my personal experience. It's a gentleman who's a nurse, an operating room nurse, orthopedic nurse, closing a wound. I believe it was at the Kuwait hospital. I ended up taking care of him as a victim at the European Gaza hospital. And in that scenario, Tamir was closing a wound on another patient. And an IDF soldier bursts into the operating room, orders everybody to leave the patient on the table by themselves, who's still under anesthesia. Tamir is closing the incision. He refuses to abandon the patient, as all of us ethically would do. In response, he was shot in the knee by the IDF soldier's rifle. It blew his proximal tibia bone, the bone below the kneecap, across the room, leaving a gaping orange-size hole in his tibia bone, the muscles shredded. And they immediately finish working on the other guy. They take Tamir to the operating room in another room and repair his knee. On the morning of the second day, the Israeli IDF comes into his room and takes him prisoner and whisks him away. And they take him to an Israeli prison. He spends 45 days in the prison. They eventually let him go, which is the IDF's acknowledgement that he's not a Hamas fighter, he's not a combatant. But when they let him go after 45 days of starvation, getting a juice box sometimes every day, mostly every other day, after 45 days of being blindfolded and handcuffed, after 45 days of absolutely no medical attention, towards his open wound. They drop him naked at the border. As a going away present, an IDF soldier rifle butts him in his right eye, exploding it in his head. And then he crawls for 3 kilometers till he gets to a roadside, dripping his vitreous humor down his cheekbone and a trail of maggots behind him on his wound. I was told that a cup of maggots was taken out of his leg, and when they first got him, and somebody brings him to the European Gaza hospital, which is only about 3 or 5 kilometers from the Israeli border. So the gentleman was starved. He was beat. He was, handcuffed. He was blindfolded. He got no wound care, and he did no crime. So this was a definitive targeting of a healthcare worker, from which multiple war crimes ensued, including the violation of the Geneva Convention and the Rome Accords that Israel themselves had signed in 1950. This gentleman was finally evacuated to Egypt. He has a Pseudomonas infection. We're trying to get him to come to the United States, where he can, restart his life here, and that's with some difficulty. Right now, he's had his 25th surgery to try to keep his leg saved, and his life is devastated. When we saw him for the first time, he just got out of a coma. A Swiss Red Cross team was taking wonderful care of him, but they were also taking wonderful care of 1,000 other patients, and he could not get the attention that small medical team could provide. And he had bed sores on the back of his head. His skull was exposed. The back of his ears had pressure sores. I've never seen that in my life. The back of his elbows, his shoulder blades, all had pressure sores. And this argues for the lack of ability to care for the thousands of patients that were in the European Gaza hospital. It wasn't for lack of desire or wonderful, volunteer nurses, because they were all volunteers. Nobody was getting paid. And all the nursing staff came from very far away to work at the European Gaza hospital, because it was in that area, the only major functioning hospital around. We were getting transfers from every hospital for a plethora of reasons, including mostly the lack of supplies or the lack of operational equipment. A CAT scan was down. We're going to ship him to you to get a CAT scan of his abdomen, and you take care of him. Lack of anesthesia equipment, lack of anesthesia sterilization, the electricity's going down, we don't have fuel. These are the routine reasons for getting transfers every hour into the European Gaza hospital. And we still couldn't take good care of hardly anybody, because we suffered from the same restrictions in getting supplies in.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perlmutter, for sharing that sharing your stories. I've heard you speak several times, and it's always a lot to hear. We're going to hear now from Dr. James Smith, who is an emergency room doctor. Dr. Smith, thank you for joining us. You have about 5 to 7 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and thank you all for being here, particularly our colleagues that are in Gaza, Dr. Mohamed and so on. I think if I can build on what my colleagues have already mentioned, which I think is painting a very comprehensive picture of the current situation in Gaza, there are a couple of things that I feel are particularly important to say at this particular moment. And here I'm drawing from the most recent OHCHR report that was published 2 days ago on the targeting of the health system in Gaza and health infrastructure and Palestinian healthcare workers. And what that report has found, it's looking specifically at the period October of 2023 through to June of this year, so hasn't yet accounted for the horrific atrocities that we've seen in more recent months, including, of course, last week the end of the 80+ days of the besieging of Kamal Adwan Hospital and the destruction of the facility there. But what that report finds, and I quote now, the attacks on hospitals often followed a similar pattern. This is looking back at attacks on Shifa and elsewhere during that several-month period, involving missile strikes on hospital buildings, the destruction of hospital facilities, shooting of civilians, sieges, as well as temporarily taking over hospital buildings. Now, this is a systematic attempt, a successful systematic attempt to completely destroy the Palestinian healthcare system in Gaza. And if we recall, it was October of last year in 2023, towards the end of that month, only a few weeks into the genocide, that the Ministry of Health in Gaza announced that the health system had totally collapsed. So we have been dealing with a system in a state of collapse since October of last year. As Dr. Mohamed's already mentioned, the health system in Gaza, despite the best efforts of Palestinian healthcare workers and public health specialists, was in a really dire state prior to October of 2023 as a result of the long-standing siege and Israeli occupation of Gaza. But nevertheless, we have a situation now where, as I say, systematic destruction of Palestinian health infrastructure. Hussam Abu Safiya has mentioned several times publicly that there is research coming soon that has found that healthcare workers in Gaza are 3.5 times more likely to be killed than civilians or individuals in other professions in Gaza. That can only indicate a degree of intentionality. When we see that level of disproportionate impact on a particular professional cadre, we can reasonably infer that this is an attempt to identify and kill healthcare workers because they are healthcare workers. So systematic, and of course, if it's systematic, then we can infer reasonably intentionality. And what we've seen now over the course of more than 14 months are the cumulative consequences of that systematic and intentional destruction of the Palestinian health system in Gaza. Now, the problem that I think that we, as a wider civil society, as internationalist healthcare workers, as humanitarian organizations are now grappling with is that, if I can speak plainly, for the most part, the way that we collectively are engaging with what is happening in Gaza is still very much through the lens of armed conflict, as opposed to a genocide. And as soon as we appreciate, as I'm sure many of the people on this call do, that this is indeed a genocide, then we can understand, we can't, of course, accept, but we can understand why Israel would use a strategy of targeting the health system, healthcare workers, and health infrastructure, because this is intended to amplify the direct effects of military violence within a broader strategy of the extermination and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. And this is, of course, certainly why we've seen sustained and targeted attacks on health infrastructure in the north of Gaza, particularly Kamal Adwan, because for as long as Kamal Adwan remained open with some degree of functionality, then people would be able to seek and receive a basic level of healthcare. Now, if you deprive people of access to water, if you deprive people of access to food, if you deprive people of access to medicine and other forms of healthcare, and you deprive them of shelter, you are forcing them, you are generating the conditions conditions that simply are unable to sustain human life. And as a result, people are forced to flee against their will. Perhaps if I can end with one final reflection, and this is to take my reflections on the role of civil society, the role of the kind of humanitarian infrastructure a step further. And this is to say, we have to appreciate the various ways in which genocide manifests. And I think we need to get to the point now that we appreciate, or at least understand, that genocide is occurring with the full cover of international law, of international humanitarian law. And I think a pivot needs to take place here. I think we need to start thinking about these systems and structures not as having failed in relation to Gaza, but rather that they are functioning, and in their functionality, they are failing to protect the Palestinian people. And if we appreciate that, then it becomes less a demand for adherence to IHL, because, of course, the Israeli occupation, the Israeli siege, the entire existence of the Israeli state has emerged under the cover and with the full protection of international humanitarian law. So I think we need to start thinking slightly differently about the framing that we're using here, the language that we're using, and the calls that we're making. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that clarity, Dr. Smith. Next, we would like to hear from Dr. Dorothea Gucciardo. Dr. Gucciardo, hello.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for joining us.
Of course. We're here today at a time when the scale of human suffering and destruction in Gaza is massive and disgusting. And among the most glaring examples of this violence are the deliberate attacks on health infrastructure, including Kamal Adwan Hospital. The human carnage and destruction we've all seen, and I witnessed myself, is the same as Rwanda. However, the tired Israeli strategy used to justify these actions is decades old. Once again, we hear lies from Israeli authorities that hospitals like Kamal Adwan are being improperly used for military purposes by armed groups. These lies are made evidence-free, never substantiated, and are often already debunked. When Israeli officials are feeling less mendacious, they are only flagrantly misleading. It's a familiar script, and it goes something like this. Israeli officials claim that Palestinian resistance fighters are hiding inside a hospital or using the site as a military base to store weapons and launch attacks as part of their freedom struggle against Israel's brutal occupation. In one such evidence-free statement, it released on December 29, 2024, the Israeli military claimed Kamal Adwan Hospital was a, quote, terror stronghold, while also claiming that the Palestinian resistance had violated international law by exploiting civilian infrastructure. Israel has repeatedly invoked similar claims since the bombing of Al-Alhi Hospital on October 17, 2023. Immediately after the Israeli attack on Al-Alhi, Hanania Naftali, the social media advisor to Netanyahu, tweeted that the Israeli Air Force attacked a, quote, terrorist base inside a hospital. A multiple number of terrorists are dead, he claimed, about the mostly women and children refugees who were killed, as though it justified such an outrageous breach of human rights. Naftali further claimed, and again, I remind you, this is evidence-free and with no precedent of it being true, that the Palestinian resistance was, quote, launching rockets from hospitals, mosques, schools, and using civilians as human shields. He claimed to be heartbroken over this. Such lies are intended to provide preemptive legal justification for Israeli war crimes. In so doing, the Israeli government is also making racist commentary about the morality of its military versus the supposed barbarism of Palestinians, the natives in this colonial narrative you're supposed to accept. The purpose of those lies is for you to blame the Palestinians themselves for forcing Israel to violate international law to attack these healthcare sites. It is worth noting that consistently, every lie told by the Israeli government going all the way back to 2008, that Palestinian resistance groups are using hospitals as military command centers, have always been disproved and debunked. Multiple investigations, including the 2009 Goldstone report, a 2015 UN fact-finding mission, a 2019 UN Commission of Inquiry, and most recently, a 2024 UN Human Rights Report found no credible evidence of Israel's claims that hospitals were being used to shield military activities. Other independent investigations and human rights organizations have similarly disproved such allegations in any round of Israeli assaults on the Gaza Strip, including in 2012, 2014, 2019, 2021, 2022, and since October 2023. Yet here we are, 452 days into Israel's genocidal war on Gaza, with 33 out of 36 hospitals damaged or destroyed and 17 left partially functional, 1,057 healthcare workers killed and 450 kidnapped, including the director of Kamal Adwan, Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya, who has spent the last few months pleading with the international community to intervene as Israeli drones and tanks encircled the hospital. His arrest and subsequent forced disappearance are not just violations of his individual rights, they are part of a broader effort to silence and intimidate those who stand up for the rights and dignity of the Palestinian people. They are war crimes. Today, Kamal Adwan, the last major health facility in North Gaza, is destroyed and out of service, depriving the 70,000 Palestinians who remain in the area of medical care. Its sister hospital, the Indonesian, was converted into an Israeli military base, another war crime. The destruction of Kamal Adwan Hospital is a microcosm of the systematic dismantling of Gaza's entire healthcare system. When I was in Gaza in May of this year, I personally witnessed the evacuations of Al-Najjar Hospital, Emirati Hospital, and Indonesian Field Hospital in response to the impending Israeli invasion of Rafah. 3 hospitals taken completely out of service within a matter of weeks. A 4th healthcare site for which we were providing support, Tel El Sultan Primary Healthcare Clinic, was converted into a morgue after the first tent massacre, and then subsequently forced out of service and eventually destroyed. As we know, the escalation of violence after October 7 marked a catastrophic turning point for Gaza's healthcare system. But Israeli airstrikes, shelling, and intense fighting is not limited to hospitals alone. The primary healthcare system in Gaza has also been completely destroyed. Prior to this Israeli war, Gaza had a well-established primary healthcare system that played a key role in maintaining public health and addressing the medical needs of the population. Primary healthcare was provided by a mix of Ministry of Health, the United Nations, non-governmental organizations, and private healthcare providers. The system offered accessible, affordable, and effective healthcare, in areas of general medicine, maternal and child health, oral and dental health, non-communicable diseases, as well as laboratory, emergency, and pharmacy services. There were approximately 5 million visits to Gaza's primary healthcare centers every year. Today, less than 20% of primary healthcare centers remain functional, and many of these are severely damaged. Some of the remaining centers are unable to provide essential healthcare services due to limited resources, a lack of medical staff, and a shortage of equipment, with access further impeded by the ongoing blockade. Many primary healthcare centers were reduced to rubble due to airstrikes. Equipment such as diagnostic machines, medical supplies, and pharmaceuticals were either destroyed or rendered unusable. Health workers have been left to treat patients in dangerous and unstable conditions. Health workers in Gaza face unimaginable challenges. They're on the front lines, risking their lives to provide care under deadly conditions. Israeli forces killed and injured many healthcare professionals as they treated the wounded and cared for those in need. The destruction of Gaza's healthcare system has devastating consequences for the population. The people of Gaza are in a dire situation due to the lack of functioning hospitals and healthcare sites, and the loss of many healthcare professionals, 2 categories that are afforded protection under international law. The situation is more critical than ever, and the international community must prevent further loss of life and provide much-needed healthcare support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gucciardo. So we have a recorded message from the UN Special Rapporteur Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng. But first, we would be very grateful if we could have a brief word or message from everyone about Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya and all the detained medical personnel and workers from Gaza and Kamal Adwan Hospital in particular. If you could please not take more than about a minute, and we would very much like to start with Dr. Mohamed. We would very much like to start with Dr. Mohamed. Yes, there you are, who is currently in Gaza. Thank you.
In our message and my message personally is that, as our colleagues mentioned, no health staff has to be, a part of this war. They have to be protected really. And I hope that all the colleagues, medical colleagues that have been arrested to be released as soon as possible, and this war stops, because there is no way to deliver really healthcare with this situation. So we call as well, on behalf of MSF, a sustained ceasefire of this war.
Thank you so much, Doctor. If we could now move on to Dr. Sultan.
Thank you. I will echo what my colleagues have all said here, and I would like to conclude on 3 points. The most important, the only way forward is communication and peace. So ceasefire, and second is particularly all the Western governments, they should stop supplying all the weapons to the Israeli military, and they should stop this complicity, and they should not be part of these war crimes, and they should not be contributing to this genocide. And third, and the most important thing is that the healthcare facilities and the healthcare workers, they should be protected. And the international humanitarian laws, we should not just talk about it in kind of paper or in vain. We should actually do some practical steps about it. And it falls with a huge responsibility on all the global medical bodies, and they should actually take some practical steps. And like they did when the crimes were being conducted in Ukraine. So they should not do dual standards and hypocrisy, and they should adopt same measures unequivocally on all across the board for all global conflicts. And the fourth thing I would also add is to open the humanitarian corridor, basically, and to supply as much as possible to support the decimated healthcare infrastructure. And the last thing which we always forget about is the future of the healthcare Gaza is the junior medical doctors and the medical students. They are in extreme need right now of the support, and we should do whatever we can to support both of these groups, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, Dr. Khan.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for this opportunity again. And I mean, I want to echo what Dr. Sultan, Dr. Mohamed said. I mean, basically, as I said in my just a few minutes ago, was just 4 points, and one, and I changed the order of them. One is really to release all the medical healthcare workers, detainees that are illegally in prison, to release them immediately, because that's going to help the healthcare system. It's a humanitarian thing to do, but it's also going to help the healthcare system to stop this attack on clinics and hospitals immediately. And I simply want us to emphasize humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions, international norms. I mean, all that has to be respected. Third is, of course, a ceasefire and to stop this genocide, which apparently is more complicated than it needs to be. But, I think before that, the first two things have to occur. And lastly, as Dr. Sultan just said, we have to plan for the day after. Right now, we have to plan for what we're going to do after this is all over with regards to rebuilding their healthcare system, besides their society, but their healthcare system in particular, from medical students to infrastructure to everything else. And of course, free Dr. Hussam. That's and heroes like him. I can't forget that. We have to keep on emphasizing that right now, because it gives us something to hold on to, something very specific and tangible. And Dr. Hussam is a hero for many of us, for the whole world, and I think he's someone that that we can kind of sort of use as an example. But there's many.
Thank you so much for that. Can we hear next from Dr. Smith?
Yes, I think I'd echo the words of my colleagues. I mean, Dr. Hussam must be released immediately. I had the good fortune, the privilege of meeting Dr. Hussam when I was in Gaza back in May, and could see met many of the patients that he was caring for. He and his colleagues were caring for. It is an absolute disgrace. It is beyond a disgrace that his son was murdered. He's had colleagues of his injured and killed. And now the latest reports are, of course, that he has been beaten and illegally detained, along with several of his colleagues and other people that were sheltering in Kamal Adwan. He and all other Palestinians that are being detained, health workers and others, need to be released immediately. The ICRC and other organizations need to be granted access to detention facilities. But more importantly than any of this sort of accountability work is their immediate release, and their release to a safe place where they can receive the care and support that they need. And of course, that needs to be that work needs to be done in parallel with sustained efforts to bring about an end to Israel's aggression in Gaza. And that requires, of course, an end not only to the immediate genocide, but the protracted siege and occupation.
Thank you so much for that. Let's continue with Dr. Perlmutter. I'm sorry, can you unmute yourself, Dr. Perlmutter?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yesterday, I met with a U.S. Congressman from California, a Republican, who was actually part of the Trump reappointment committee. And Congressman Isa and I and other Jewish Republican members of Congress are meeting in early February to enact some changes, to do several things. One, to work on the healthcare system in Gaza for a long-term plan, but also immediately stop the detaining of healthcare workers and their torture as a violation of both the Leahy Act and U.S. Participation in all peace treaties from the Rome Accords and the preceding Geneva Conventions. And so that's underway, and we have, and as do other colleagues in England, have underway placement programs for Palestinian medical students. We have 3 in the United States now. We have room for more. Funding is our big problem. We have admission to several medical school programs, and MSU has volunteered their academic program for any institution in the world to get their training and certification for the PA to grant their certification. So they'll be willing to train anywhere, but the PA will give them their certification. The problem is just funding for these things. And if we can develop more funding, many hundreds of students can undergo the continuation of their programming. And so there are some things that are already underway, and hopefully they'll bear fruit soon.
Thank you very much for those words. Next, Dr. Gucciardo, can we hear from you?
Yes, thank you. The international community must take a meaningful stand for human rights and humanity, and that starts with a ceasefire. We must see an immediate arms embargo on Israel. Governments must stop laying diplomatic and military cover for Israel through statements and military partnerships. Instead, the international community must start granting immediate and unlimited aid to the Palestinian health system. It must call for the release of Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya and all 450 illegally detained healthcare workers. Governments must start talks with the Palestinian Ministry of Health and the government writ large, and start recognizing Palestinians as people, and recognize the right of Palestinians to live a life free of violence, apartheid, and occupation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. We will now hear the message from UN Special Rapporteur, Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng. Can you please run the video?
I welcome the opportunity to speak to you all today in my capacity as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health, and I am Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng. We have watched the horror of a genocide in Gaza unfold for over a year now, representing what is a display of a recalcitrant, a repugnant attitude of an occupying regime and its global allies. More than 450 days later into this current escalation, the ongoing enactment of decades-long genocidal plans, systemic and sustained imperialist violence experienced by Palestinians every day since the occupation. The promise by Israel leaders to destroy Gaza has been fulfilled, and the struggle to hold on to any resemblance of life amid deprivation and disease. The practice of medicine is under attack. Just days into this war in 2023, I warned that Gaza and its medical infrastructure was on the path of being irreparably damaged, that healthcare providers were working in dire situation, themselves under bombardment in the enclave in ways we have not seen before. Still, that early warning to prevent further human rights violations was ignored globally, even within the United Nations Security Council. More than 1,000 healthcare workers have reportedly been killed in Gaza, and we know some of these statistics are a gross understatement. And the West Bank, of course, as well, since October the 7th, 2023. This includes nurses, paramedics, doctors, and other medical personnel, as well as ambulance drivers. Not only is Israel killing and causing irreparable harm against Palestinians, but Israel and their allies, both in Europe and America, are also knowingly and intentionally destroying the underlying social and economic determinants of health and any possibility necessary to sustain life. Israel and these allies have ignored the International Court of Justice, as well as myself and many other UN experts, and continue to commit an immeasurable number of violations under international humanitarian law, alongside widespread violations of international human rights law. This cannot be denied. I have received information regarding harassment, intimidation, and detention of healthcare workers, including arrests of medical personnel while on duty, medical personnel being forced to evacuate hospitals and immediately being arrested or intimidated for those who are defying evacuation orders. Some are dying under those circumstances of detention, reportedly being beaten in prison, with their bodies showing signs of torture once they have been killed. I have communicated to the member state, Israel, in an urgent appeal, which is now public and widely available, some of these concerns on individual cases, for example, Dr. Ziad El-Dadu, Dr. Al Bush, and recently, Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya, whose son was also killed just a few weeks. I have communicated to the member state Israel on information of others, more than 128 healthcare workers, who are also remaining in custody, being arbitrarily detained by Israeli forces while on duty. The Palestinian territory, including Gaza, is under illegal occupation by Israel, to which international humanitarian law applies. Israel is obligated to protect, promote, and respect the human rights of all individuals, particularly the foundational right to life, upon which all other human rights are dependent. And my mandate on the right to health has been previously engaging with the member state Israel without success, but we have done so even during the COVID pandemic and previously, and continue with my previous predecessors in demanding and advocating for Israel to allow parents to accompany their children to receive specialized treatment. In medical evacuations are still being denied, and even more so now in this context of the genocide. We can understand how this Israel and its allies continuing with the despicable acts of support to an occupying regime with billions of dollars in aid, with weapons, political and cover from accountability, diplomatic cover from accountability, to continue its destruction as an occupying power to enact a genocide. What a despicable display of global solidarity, and to what it has shifted from a human rights protection and promotion and accountability to what we see now as outright impunity. I reiterate my call as follows: that all states have a legal obligation to comply with the ICJ's ruling. They must prevent a genocide and intervene to immediately stop when it happens. All immediate and future interventions aimed at peace mediation and any lasting solution to peace must center the restoration of dignity of the people of Palestine. And the right to health is central to that. And an urgent, independent, and impartial investigation and accountability mechanisms for those who have been detained and killed by them, such as our own medical colleagues and healthcare workers. I personally commit as follows: to all oppressed people everywhere in the world, exploited, humiliated, brutalized, and colonized, I fulfill my mandate viscerally aware and understand the compounding nature of the crushing weight of the issues that you face. I share with you in the rage and the fury that we carry, so many of us around the world, and will continue with unwavering solidarity using all of the methods available to me as an independent expert to the United Nations. I hope that one day we will share different collective connection as humanity that isn't based on the experiences of colonial imperialist trauma, of what it has taken from us and our people and our collective future. The heroic actions of the Palestinian doctors, my colleagues in Gaza, teach us what it means to have taken the medical oath, but rest assured, this is completely unnecessary. They do not have to go through what is such a time of depraved humanity for us to be able to recognize them as doing something important. The practice of medicine is never a crime, but the targeting, killing of healthcare workers is a crime, and Israel must stop. I will address the Human Rights Council in June and also address the UN General Assembly in October of 2025, and preparing a thematic report which I hope will be a step forward in some kind of accountability for us to understand and focus on health and care workers as key protectors of the right to health. And I hope that we can understand and provide the necessary support for all of the healthcare workers' own rights, but also their own occupational health rights, for the incredible work and important role that they do for human rights, for peace, for security, for development, and ultimately for justice. A genocide is incompatible with the right to health. It's incompatible with the realization of the right of everyone to the highest attainable standards of physical and mental health. We need an immediate ceasefire, an end to the occupation, an end to the genocide. I am Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng, a medical doctor and the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right of everyone to the highest attainable standards of physical and mental health. And I demand the release of Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya and all healthcare workers who are detained by a brutal Israeli regime. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thank you so much to everyone for joining us. It's been an absolute honor to hear from all of you. Let's all continue to demand an immediate release of Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya and other detained medical professionals. And as you all have voiced, an immediate ceasefire, an end to occupation and genocide, and a respect for international law and rights of healthcare professionals. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.